Hi there, and welcome to another one of my classic series where I pick a film that's one of my all-time favourites, give it a rewatch and then review it. And in this video I'm going to be talking about Werckmeister Harmonies, the fantastic film from Bela Tarr, one of the finest filmmakers ever lived and among my all-time personal favourite directors. Werckmeister Harmonies is a fantastic work. It is one of the most depressing experiences I can name, and I think that's a really good thing. First of all, the style of this film is not a style which most people will have ever really come across. It's a very distinctive film, and the only other films like it are films by the same director. So Bela Tarr is a Hungarian director. He rose to prominence in the 70s and 80s, and he made a bunch of films, but starting in the late 80s he adopted this very unique style, where his movies would all be filmed in black and white. All the takes would be really long. I think the average length of a shot in Werckmeister Harmonies is about 3 to 4 minutes. And his story would all be philosophical and depressing and about the bleakest of things in life. And that's kind of his whole thing is, I'm going to be bleak and I'm going to film in black and white and make it really, really laborious. His work is laborious because after a while you settle into his hypnotically, enchantingly slow work and you just kind of let the soul of the universe pour into you, and the whole vacuous nature of life is sort of shown before you because you're sat there watching an incredibly slow movie where characters literally walk to locations for 5 minutes and the camera just doesn't move. It's really, really that kind of filmmaking. In fact, Tarr's greatest ever work, in my opinion, is Saturn Tango, which is an absolute masterpiece at 7.5 hours long, but that's the reason it's 7.5 hours. Werckmeister Harmonies, however, is one of Tarr's most accessible films. I think it's one of his most accessible and one of his greatest films. It is only 2.5 hours, for those wondering, and don't be scared or put off by the seeming impossibility to get towards it. It is definitely a film which seems like it's a hurdle, but once you really struggle with it, it's really, really rewarding. So Werckmeister Harmonies is based off of the wonderful novel The Melancholy Resistance by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. Can I just bitch about the DVD a bit, because I want to just say something from Artificial Eye. What the fuck are you doing? From the director of Damnation and The Man from London. Damnation is probably Tarr's least known work from his later period. And The Man from London is his worst film from his later period. Why the fuck wouldn't he put on Saturn Tango and The Cheering Horse? Saturn Tango is his best known film, and The Cheering Horse is his film that won the most awards. Are you kidding me? What the fuck are you doing? Okay, but bitching aside, Melancholy Resistance is a fantastic work. So this is by Laszlo Krasznahorkai, who, if you are aware of your literature, is kind of a leading writer in European literature. He is a writer of political and philosophical allegory, and his works all take on this very difficult to read style. The key plot of Werckmeister Harmonies, or The Melancholy Resistance, the book, in and of itself, is basically there's a small village and a circus arrives. And that circus contains a dead whale and a man called the Prince. And all these crowds turn up to see the whale and visit and hear from the prince, but meanwhile in the town people are worried about all these new people and about circus, and a lot of fear-mongering happens, and then it ends up going into this kind of political allegory about revolution and about people who feel they've been wronged. In fact, the film opens with this very interesting idea where the first 10 minutes is taken up by a character in a bar retelling the story of the universe and telling how the earth moves around the sun and how all the systems work. Then there's an eclipse, and then everything returns to normal. But the film then kind of plays out in this metaphor, the systems all being shown, but then ultimately when the eclipse does happen, or the metaphorical eclipse within the characters' lives that happens, it doesn't return to the same. Or maybe it does return to the same. That's kind of what's interesting, is that the film is in many ways about the system and how can we change it, but then at the same time acknowledging that change will never happen. In fact, the film is very political but very, very nihilist. It seems to think that no side is really worth it, and that the power play that happens in Werckmeister Harmonies, whether it be by the prince or by Tunde Esther, who's the kind of lead matriarchal figure in the town, whether or not either of them have the solutions to the people's problems. And in fact, they're both kind of playing this game, and it doesn't really matter who's playing it, because whoever is in charge has won already. The game is played within their confines, so when people hate him, when people have, and the way people feel is not really determined by them, and so they kind of lash out for no reason, and they kind of want to go back to this traditionalist way, but traditionalism in and of itself is not revolutionary, but the characters think it is, and so they end up in this really weird vibe, and there's just this sense of it's all meaningless. In fact, that's literally why the title of the book is perhaps a more telling interpretation, The Melancholy of Resistance. It's about how resistance is pointless. I mean, if you're going to get rid of law and order only to have your own law and order, then what's really changed? There's still law and order. Or, I mean, you can't really win anything. And there's so many other side aspects. I mean, there's a wonderful metaphor to do with the giant whale, which, you know, many have cited as being an example of representation of the state. But I kind of see it as more than that. It's a representation of kind of everything that's omnipresent, everything that we see everywhere. It's about the state in a way. Maybe it represents God. Maybe it represents the system. Maybe it represents the establishment. Maybe it represents just society. The main character, whose eyes we see the story of Werckmeister Harmonies, finds wonder in the whale, but no one else seems to. Maybe there is no wonder out there, or maybe people never see the wonder. Maybe that's quite a depressing thought. I mean, the wonder never really happens, and so we're only shown it through this whale, which in and of itself is just this giant rotting object that is so ugly, but the magnitude of its ugliness almost becomes beautiful. And in fact, the sheer unlikeliness of its presence in this town is kind of a miracle. It's such an odd combination of things, and the whale is ultimately left out standing in the public square because everyone can see the whale, but no one wants to do anything with it. Everyone just ignores it, and the one character who sees wonder is crushed because even though there's a division within the town, the one thing you cannot be is amazed. You cannot be happy at something. You cannot be uncertain. In an era of division, in an era of tribalism, that's kind of what you have to accept. In fact, right now in this kind of Trumpian era of politics, we're kind of in an era where divisions are quite clear and where you kind of have to take a side in almost every aspect. And the people who don't are the people who kind of get crushed by it. I mean, this is the world teetering on the apocalypse, both in the film and I guess kind of in a real life. But we're waiting for this apocalypse to happen, and it never does, and so whatever ideals we may have end up being crushed because we never reach a point where things are so bad that idealism can succeed. We only ever reach a point where everything is shit, everyone knows it's shit, but no one wants to do anything. And those that do things don't realise that what they're doing is playing into the hands of people who won't do anything. And so you just end up with this nihilistic worldview of everything's terrible, we're all gonna die, we're all gonna end up finding nothing but beauty in perhaps the only thing we can, which might be the eye of a whale, which will then just gaze upon nothing. We'll go further back, we'll take a look at this same whale and realise that's all for nothing, and then we'll die, and then we'll realise that there's not even any point crying about how crap it is. All you've got is the fact that you're trying to cry looking at the waterless eye of a dead whale. There's nothing to it. The world is empty. It is just death. It is just terrible and brutal and nasty. So yeah, Werckmeister Harmonies is a depressing as fuck film. I think there's so many ways to read this text and to read the film, and this is why it's beyond brilliant. Not only is it fantastically stylized in a way that seems at first distancing, but ultimately is so enticing because shot length after shot length is just pure realism. But on top of that is all allegory, it's all metaphor. It all means something, but you don't know what. And when you do know what it means, you realise you're just stumbling across this worldview, which you kind of have to go, yeah, that kind of sucks. And then it's all bleakness from there on out. It is a film I can't really recommend for a good time. But if you want to challenge yourself, I think this is one of the most challenging films that exists without being the super challengingness of a film like Saturn Tango. Like, Bela Tarr has made more challenging movies than Werckmeister Harmonies. I'd specifically cite The Cheering Horse as being a film that's more challenging and more depressing than Werckmeister Harmonies. And yet Werckmeister Harmonies sits in this weird middle ground, where I feel like it's the film that he's made which is the most just overtly political in some regards. I definitely think it's about revolution. But here's the other thing also. Maybe my interpretation is way wrong on this. I don't know what it means, and Bela Tarr and Laszlo Krasznahorkai have been very difficult to pin down on what they think their work means. So I'm not saying that I'm right. I say I think this is what I think it's about, the pointlessness of resistance and the pointlessness of trying to change things because we can never change things. Because if a society needs a leader, which is kind of what you need for change, then a leader requires there to be opposition because no leader can ever encapsulate everybody, and if authority has an opposing authority, then by definition it's powerless because authority isn't controlling, and so you kind of all get into it. And then this whole collectivism thing, like people come together as a community, but all that community is built upon the lies of individualism. Individualism in and of itself is controlling them, but they think it's collectivist, so maybe neither system's good. It's almost like the works of Tarr and Krasznahorkai are just basically going, nothing's good. And you know, on some level I agree with it. On some level I kind of see what they're going for in the whole, yeah, it's all kind of crappy. I buy that line of logic. I like the fact that the film is out there, it's different, it's challenging, but it's rewarding, and I think anyone could watch this and interpret it differently to me. I don't think my interpretation is definitive. In fact, I think my interpretation is far from definitive. I think I'm definitely a little bit off on certain points. In fact, I don't really know what I think of all the parts of it. All I know is every time I watch Werckmeister Harmonies, I get engaged, I get involved, and I end up questioning everything about life. And I think that's ultimately the mark of a deep film, is that I think there's no denying this is substance all the way through. It's stylized as fuck, but man, that substance is there. Werckmeister Harmonies is masterful, it's just genius, it's really, really clever, it's fascinating, it's philosophical, it's political, it's emotional, it's distancing, but it's also engaging, it's hypnotic, it's bizarre, all these things. So, I love Werckmeister Harmonies. I would love to hear your thoughts on this film if you've seen it, and post a comment. I'd love to read what you think of this film. Leave a like if you like this video, and subscribe, because I'll be posting more reviews of stuff like this. If you want to keep up to date with what I watch, you can follow me on Twitter or Letterboxd, links in the description. And thank you for watching.